Assalamu alaikum dear students, and welcome to the 22nd session of the KIPS distance learning program newspaper roundup session. The topic for today is what is the NFC award and what is the debate that is surrounding the NFC award these days. So before we get into that, let's see what the NFC award is essentially. So the National Finance Commission Award was a formula that was created in 1971 following the debacle of Bangladesh and the separation of Bangladesh, in a very important development that was created in order to ensure that the kind of provincialism and the provincial sentiments that led to the creation of Bangladesh and the separation of East Pakistan could be curtailed. So during that time, one of the main reasons why the Bengali people felt alienated by Western Pakistan and by the rest of Pakistan is because they felt, among other things, that the resource distribution was not fair towards them, and majority of the resources through taxes, different forms of taxes that was collected by the Federation and in the form of foreign exchange that was collected by the Federation was not equitably distributed between West Pakistan and East Pakistan, right? And that was one of the major grievances of the Bengali people, of Mujibur Rahman, of the Awami League, which eventually led to secession of East Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh. Now, in order to ensure that such kind of provincial sentiment and provincialism and regional nationalism that does not take root in what was left of Pakistan, it was essential to ensure that all the factors that led to that secessionist sentiment in the first place be stopped or curtailed. So one of those sentiments was the inequitable sharing of resources between the provinces and the Federation. So in order to improve the center-province relations, immediately following the passing of the 1973 Constitution, it was included within the articles of the Constitution that a National Finance Commission Award will be constructed, wherein one committee constituting members from all provinces is going to decide what formula will be used for the distribution of the resources that the Federation collects each year from different sources such as indirect taxes, income taxes, foreign exchange, and etc. So until date we've had 8 NFC awards, and the primary purpose of NFC award was to try to bring some semblance of justice in the distribution of resources between the center and the provinces. And this was especially true in the case of the smaller provinces, those that have lesser population such as Balochistan, Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They felt that their legitimate rights to the resources of Pakistan were not catered to by the Federation, and this is quite accurately termed by the writer Anatole Levin in his book Pakistan: A New History as the Punjabization of Pakistan, which means that Punjab was completely dominant over the policies of the Federation, of the federal government, and the Federation was hijacked by the Punjabi elites. So in order to ensure that some justice is done, the NFC was created, and it was done also in the backdrop of the ongoing anti-Pakistan movement within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, within Sindh, Sindhu Desh, for example, and Balochistan, the Balochistan Liberation Front, for example, right? So the 8 NFC awards that we've had until now have distributed the resources in a fixed criteria of sorts. So the 100% distribution of resources was done on the basis of population. So the province with the highest population would get the highest amount of resources from the federal divisible pool. That meant that 51 to 52% of the total federal divisible pool went to Punjab every year, and naturally the other provinces were not happy with it. Moreover, there is a mechanism inbuilt within the National Finance Commission Award as enshrined under the 1973 Constitution that every 5 years a new NFC committee will be formed that will announce a new NFC award to see whether some changes in the formula or some other kind of alterations are needed in the NFC award or not. Until now we've had 8 NFCs. The latest NFC was the 8th NFC award. And the 8th NFC award was presented in the backdrop of the 18th Amendment. Actually, it was presented 1 month before the 18th Amendment. Now, before the 8th NFC Award, the total federal divisible pool of the resources or revenue that was collected each year, 57% of that went to the federal government, which means the federation was given the 57% share, and it used that for defense purposes, for foreign policy and other subjects that were within its power under the federal legislative list and even the concurrent legislative list. However, now the 8th NFC Award substantially reduced the federal share from 57% and brought it down to 43%, whereas the province's share was increased from 43% to 57%. That was a substantial increase in the resources that the provinces would now receive in order to cater to the many new subjects that they were given according to the devolution that happened in the 18th Amendment. That includes health, education, agriculture, irrigation, dam construction, and many other subjects that were devolved to the provinces after the 18th Amendment. So the additional resources that were given to the provinces by the 8th NFC Award was basically meant to help them cope and cater and handle the additional powers, many additional powers that the provincial governments were given after the 18th Amendment. However, there were quite naturally problems with the 18th Amendment as well. The 18th Amendment, the 8th NFC Award, revised the formula of the previous NFCs from being 100% population oriented to just 82% being population, whereas 8% being backwardness, 10% including other factors such as revenue collection ability and poverty levels, right? So some kind of justice was in the card when the 8th NFC was passed, and that increased Balochistan and Sindh's share in the NFC award substantially. So each nearly received 5 to 7% more resources that they were receiving under the 7th NFC award, and that was a major win for center-province relations and for national integration. However, the problems that were present in the NFC award and in the revenue distribution ability and structure of Pakistan's federation were still there. For example, Sindh alone generates 69% of the total revenue that is collected by the federation, whereas it only gets 24% share in the federal divisible pool. And that is a major discrepancy, despite the fact that Punjab contributes less than half of the revenue that Sindh does. It still gets nearly double revenue and resources from the federation as Sindh gets. Now that's a clear discrepancy, and something that the Sindhi politicians have been using as a provincial card to create anti-federation sentiments within their populations as well. Secondly, one of the major issues with the 8th NFC was also the royalty issue, which means that each province has land. That land has a lot of natural resources within it, right? So when the federation extracts those natural resources, since they were extracted from the land of the provincial government, they should get a share in the value and the money that is generated by the sale and purchase of that natural resource. And that is what is known as royalty. So in the 8th NFC award, 50% royalty of the total revenue that was generated by those natural resources was promised to the provinces, whereas in reality only 8% royalty was being given to the provinces by the federation until 2019. And in order to ensure that if there are some discrepancies in the distribution of the resources by the federation to the federating units, the Council of Common Interests was empowered to look into that matter and to resolve those issues. However, the Council of Common Interest has been a rubber stamp and hasn't really achieved the objective of improving national integration within Pakistan by ensuring equitable distribution of resources and royalty. Right, so these are the two major issues with the 8th NFC award. So the question arises, why do we need the 10th NFC award that is being discussed right now? So one of the main reasons is that despite the 8th NFC award and the 18th Amendment, and 10 years since the 18th Amendment has passed, even 11 years, not much development has happened in the education and the health sectors in two important provinces, which is Sindh and Balochistan. The conditions of their public health services and public education sector are still abysmal and similar and comparable to the way that they were before the 18th Amendment and before the 8th NFC Award, which means that perhaps one of the reasons for that is lesser resources available to the provinces, which means that they need even more resources than the 8th NFC Award gave them in order to do justice to these powers of education, these subjects and health. So, for example, another good example of how the provinces lack resources comes from Punjab. Due to mega projects that Punjab has undergone in the recent years, in 5-6 years, in this decade, Punjab has accumulated a huge public debt. So the Punjab treasury is potentially empty. There are billions of rupees of loans and debts that the Punjabi economy needs to pay back. It does not have the resources to do that. Secondly, Balochistan hasn't seen much real development ever since the 18th Amendment and the 8th NFC Award, which is why the nationalistic fervor and the anti-Pakistan sentiment that was present in a lot of Balochistani people, Balochis, is still present to an extent and may even have been exaggerated. Right. So what can we hope from the 10th NFC Award, and why did the 9th NFC Award not materialize? So the 9th NFC Award was supposed to happen in 2015. At that time, the Noon League was in power in Pakistan. And the Noon League was in power primarily because of its provincial government in Punjab. So the Noon League has had a stronghold in Punjab, which was partially broken by the PTI in the 2018 elections. So if a 9th NFC Award would have been announced, and then it would have altered the formula of the NFC, perhaps Punjab was set to lose from the 9th NFC Award, which means that Punjab's share in the federal divisible pool would probably have reduced if a new NFC was awarded. And that was something that was politically damaging to the Sharifs and the Noon League, which is why they, really did not give much attention to the NFC Award, which was their constitutional duty, by the way, and the 9th NFC Award never materialized. So now we move on to the 10th NFC Award. We jump onto that. Now, the PTI government during its election campaign, and the PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf political party, and in its manifesto has clearly mentioned that it will bring the 10th NFC Award and bring better and more equitable sharing of resources from the federal divisible pool. Now, it seems clear that they are trying to fulfill the promises that they made during their election campaign. What can we expect from the 10th NFC Award? Well, that's difficult to ascertain at this point, but hopefully some revenue sources will increase, number one. Number two, Balochistan and Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's share in the federal divisible pool might increase because the formula for determining the division of resources might be altered by the 10th NFC Award to bring even more equitability in the distribution of resources. So perhaps the 10th NFC Award can prove to be a blessing in these times of pandemic, where each provincial government lacks the resources that it needs to cater to the huge population and prevent the major breakout of coronavirus pandemic in Pakistan. Thank you very much for your patience. All the best.